Well, everyone, I'm Mohammad Tawakkoli, the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. I welcome you all to another session of the monthly lecture series, Persian Second Language Pedagogy. The series is co-organized by Professor Shabani Jadidi of the University of Chicago and Professor Azita Taleghani of the University of Toronto. Persian Second Language Pedagogy is co-hosted and co-sponsored by the University of Chicago's Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilization and the Center for Middle Eastern Studies and the University of Toronto's Department of Near and Middle Eastern Civilizations. We are grateful for their support. I am thankful to the Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute for generously funding the establishment of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. At the outset, I'd like to express our solidarity with the inspiring women's movement in Iran and our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and teach on their ancestral homeland. Professor Shabani Jadidi, our incredible and resourceful colleague, will introduce our speaker and moderate today's session featuring Professor Azita Taleghani. Professor Shabani Jadidi, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Tawakkoli Targhi and Professor Mir-Djalali for making this possible. And thank you everybody who are here. It is my honor to introduce my dearest colleague to you, Azita Taleghani. Dr. Azita Taleghani is Associate Professor, Teaching Stream in Persian Language, Literature, and Linguistics at the University of Toronto. Her research has primarily focused on second language learners and heritage speakers' pedagogy, linguistic approaches in modern Persian literature, especially stylistic aspects in the poems of Persian women poets, Persian syntax and morphology, as well as web-based and online language teaching. She is the Associate Director and a member of the editorial board of the Encyclopedia Iranica Women Poets. She has published a monograph named Modality, Aspect, and Negation in Persian. She is currently working on a monograph on grammar of Persian simple verbs for Persian second language learners and co-editing a volume on Persian second language pedagogy, new trends and innovations, which is this series. The two other projects that she has recently started concentrate on the language and style in the poems of contemporary Iranian women poets, as well as the social deconstruction in the poems of ancient and medieval Iranian women poets. She has published several refereed articles, most recently, Archaism as an Aesthetic, Technique, and Linguistic Process, Negative Forms of Persian Progressive Tense, Evidence from Monolingual Second Language Learners and Heritage Speakers, Foregrounding and its Role in Persian Modern Poetry, Persian Progressive Tense, Serial Verb Construction or Aspectual Complex Predicate, and Persian Linguistics in the 20th Century. Azita Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Punejan. And I also want to thank Elahé Mir-Djalali, Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies and its director, Professor Tawakkoli, for his constant support. Without him, we couldn't have this lecture series and many lecture series that right now is happening in the Institute and the University of Toronto. And I also want to thank each one of you, colleagues, friends, who joined in this session, the last session of our winter 2023 visual lecture series of second language pedagogy, specifically during the weekend, and it would be my pleasure to share my idea, my opinion, my research with you. So let's share my slides and yes. Okay. So as you see from the title, my research recently focused on the acquisition of a Persian differential object marker and a challenge that second language learner and heritage learner have in the class for production, for applying the direct object and specifically differential object marker. So cross-linguistically, there are two classes of objects. Objects marked overtly, known by differential object marking, and unmarked objects. In Persian, the morpheme ra in formal and written, in spoken and colloquial, we have ro and o, has been typically treated as differential object marker, which appears on a specific direct object or definite direct object. In literature, we have different, discussion about that. So if you consider the first sentence in Persian, دیروز صدف به من کتابی داد. Sadaf gave a book to me yesterday. So I highlighted direct object here. Direct object does not have ra because it's not specific or definite. In B, we have دیروز صدف به من این کتاب را داد. So Sadaf gave this book to me yesterday. Since we have a demonstrative adjective here and makes the noun definite or specific, we need differential object marker ra. So it doesn't matter how complex or how long is our non-phrase in the direct object position, when it's in the specific or definite, we use ra. In 2a, we have دیروز آن دختر زیبا را در کتابخانه دیدم. I saw that beautiful girl in the library yesterday. So as you see, as I highlighted here, so differential object marker comes at the end of the noun phrase. In B, we have more than one adjective. دیروز آن دختر زیبای قد بلند را در کتابخانه دیدم. I saw that beautiful tall girl in the library yesterday. So again, differential object marker ra comes at the end of the noun phrase. So in this presentation, I gave you a brief background of historical and semantic notion concepts of differential object marker, and again a short overview in theoretical background, specifically theoretical linguistics in the frame of minimalism, Chomsky, Face Theory 2007, but very, very simple version of that, because I know that this lecture series is not a linguistic lecture series. That's why I try to avoid many of the technical definition and concept over there. And also I highlighted those hypotheses in second language acquisition in the frame of generative grammar, transformational grammar, regarding differential object marker. Then I will elaborate the pilot study that I have in differential object marker this year and discuss the result of this experiment. And at the end, I conclude my presentation with some recommendation and remarks. So historically, in Old Persian, ra appears as radi, as marking a cause with the meaning of the sake of. The same interpretation holds for rai, the reflex of radi in Middle Persian. According to Brunner, Middle Persian rai served other functions as well, like purpose, reference, beneficiary, or even indirect object. So it's not surprising because differential object marker we can see in several languages. In Hindi, Urdu, also we have differential object marker, but differential object marker postposition code that it's used in Hindi also used as a dative marker and dative case too. So usually it happens in many languages that, diachronically, these changes happen to the differential object marker. So based on the semantics, the universally common semantic factors distinguishes a differential object marker are definiteness, specificity, animacy, and topicality. Direct objects which are higher on the animacy and the definiteness scale are differentially marked. So we know that in animacy scale, humans are the highest in the scale and the lowest is in animate. In definiteness, personal pronoun, proper names, definite MP, indefinite specific MP, and the lowest scale is non-specific MP. So I just give a simple definition of a specific MP here. When we use a specific noun phrase, usually the speaker has an individual in his or her mind as a referent. When we say non-specific noun phrase, it means that they cannot link to the previous discourse and usually denote novelty of reference in the discourse. So in the grammar, indefinite specific noun phrases in all languages usually comes with a pre-modifier, universal quantifier like every and each in English or har in Persian. And also partitive forms like two of the books, three of the girls, دو تا دختر, سه تا صندلی. These are the partitive MPs that consider as indefinite specific noun phrases. So in a theoretical linguistic, the most recent proposal in generative grammar, minimalism, phase theory, Chomsky 2007, regarding Persian differential object marker is proposed by Karimi and Smith in 2020. They consider both specific and non-specific direct object base generated in a predicate phrase. Believe me, this is the simplest way that I could show their discussion. I hope that it's not boring for non-linguist friends in the session. So, but the specific object cannot state in predicate phrase because predicate phrase in discourse is the domain of novel and new information and reference. That's why there is no choice to escape and goes out of the predicate phrase in a place like this, and we call the spec of small VP, and then after syntax, post-syntactically in morphological interface, differential object marker raw added to that. This is the theory. This is theoretical linguistic approach to differential object marker raw. So again, doesn't matter that how complex is our noun-phrase. Specific noun-phrase usually cannot stay in predicate phrase, and then after escaping of predicate phrase, differential object raw added post-syntactically. So for making more, clear the discussion, I gave you a sentence with a relative clause. دیروز دختر زیبایی که قد بلند بود را در کتابخانه دیدم. I saw a beautiful girl who was tall in the library yesterday. So based on the theoretical linguistic proposal that I highlighted a couple of minutes ago, the differential object marker comes after the noun phrase that I highlighted here, and noun phrase includes relative clause. But all of native speakers, when we talk to them and when we all, Persian speaker, we see that the more frequent one is the second one. دیروز دختر زیبایی را که قد بلند بود در کتابخانه دیدم. I saw a beautiful girl who was tall in the library yesterday. So we see that differential object marker, instead of coming based on the theoretical linguistic proposal, comes after the MP, comes in the MP, inside the MP, before relative clause. And this is the most frequent one that we see that native speakers use it. So what about second language acquisition hypothesis? In the frame of a universal grammar, there are 4 or 5 hypotheses regarding the features that we call in universal grammar interpretable, uninterpretable feature, which includes differential object marker. One of them is interpretably hypothesis, the other is reassembly hypothesis. Both of them, they say that as we all know that L1 and L2 grammar are very different, and doesn't matter uninterpretable or interpretable feature, doesn't matter syntax or semantic feature, it's a challenge for L2 learner. But the last 2 hypotheses, that one of them is very popular, specifically in the context of a differential object marker, is interface vulnerability hypothesis. Recently, I found there are many articles in second language acquisition of differential object marker of Spanish, Romanian, Turkish, Hindi, about this frame, in this hypothesis. Under this hypothesis, it's argued that linguistic features which are interface conditioned may be universally more difficult to occur, not just by L2 learner, also for child, for first language acquisition. There would cause delays in child acquisitions, and also they would be a source of prolonged delays, if not permanent interference, for a childhood, for child bilingual acquisition. And the third part, which is more related to our discussion, it constitutes a primary source for non-pathological attrition or incomplete acquisition for bilingual and heritage learner, that it's a focus on our classroom. The last hypothesis, which is the most, I can say that the oldest one, but many of the specifically discussion of second language pedagogy and acquisition on functional heads in universal grammar, covered by full access, full transfer hypothesis. They argue that all L2 parameters value involving interpretable, uninterpretable feature is a syntax or semantic features, L2 learner can successfully learn it, but it takes time. They argues that adult L2 learner can overcome a similar logical problem in L2 acquisition, given their full access to universal grammar. They believe that L1 and L2 are different, but since L2 learner also have access to universal grammar, it's manageable. They can overcome the difficulty of learning in any grammatical topic. Previous studies of differential object marker more focus of Romance languages like Spanish and Romanian. For these 2 languages, the differential object marker triggered by 2 semantic features, animacy and specificity. That's why it's more complicated. Recently, I found many discussion in Hindi, in Turkish, and also in Bantu language has a differential object marker. But all of this discussion give evidence that differential object marker is problematic to L2 learner whose L1 is English or any language that does not have differential object marker, and is challenge for the students. Unfortunately, for Persian, I couldn't find any research on a differential object marker acquisition that focus on Persian. The only article that recently published in 2017 by Lisa Avram and Christina Siovaranache, they focus on selective transfer in the learning differential object marker in L2 Persian. The main question that this scholar had to what extent similarities and differences between L1 and L2 can affect the implementation of semantic universal in the learning of differential object marker system. So they tested in different oral and written production experiments that they have. They tested a Romanian student who wanted to learn Persian as L2, and they wanted to see how they, because Romanian also have differential object marker, but for Romanian also specificity is the semantic feature triggering that. Okay, back to our classroom. This is something that I believe we have to test everything. Everything in theory is fine as long as we test it in the class and see that how's going on. I look at different textbooks that we teach in Persian right now. We see that how, based on the organization of the grammatical topic, it depends in which, standard of proficiency level they use. But all in all, in all of them, they started teaching direct object when the students are in novice high, impactful, or then novice mid, novice high, and then continue to intermediate low and intermediate high. When the students before learn the simple sentence structure, they know what is verb, they know what is copula, they know what is linking verb, then we push them to learn transitive and intransitive verb. When they start learning transitive, this is the time that we start to teach them, okay, we have direct object here, and this is differential object marker there. But in all languages that we have differential object marker, in the classroom, the main error that language learners have is, at the beginning specifically, they either omit or have overgeneralized differential object marker. This is the result of L2 learner. We can go with different kind of the practice, different changing the method of teaching, and try to build this knowledge for the students. But at the beginning, the majority of them, almost all of them, have these two kinds of the error. But what about heritage learner? Heritage speakers of languages, in all languages that have differential object marker, in different articles that I studied, mainly omit differential object marker if the majority language for them is English or any language that does not have differential object marker. So let's see how does it work in Persian. How L2 learners respond to direct object raw in differential object marker raw, and how heritage learner respond in the class. So the main purpose of my study here is to investigate the acquisition of Persian differential object marking, DOM, specifically in the structure of relative clause. Because this is a challenge. And when we talk about that, at the beginning, it's challenge for the students when they do not know relative clause. But when we add relative clause, they have huge challenge to process learning. By second language learner and a heritage learner, evaluating to which extent their knowledge of differential object marker can be explained by different theories of acquisition and theoretical linguistic. In fact, I want to examine the theoretical linguistics prediction about the position of raw and then see that how second language acquisition hypothesis explain Persian differential object marker. So in this pilot project, I had 7 heritage learners from low to high literacy skills. The average age is 21, 22. 5 L2 learner from low to high proficiency level. The average age is 22. And I have a control group of native speaker. 3 of my native speaker graduated from high school from Iran. One of them even went to the university for in Iran for 1 year, and recently moved to Canada for education or for living, just 2 or 3 years. My methodology is a longitudinal error analysis of L2 and heritage learner, mainly qualitatively, but I have some, because of the statistic percentage that really helpful for my analysis, I added some quantificational discussion too. The tasks are 2 main tasks: production task and acceptability and grammaticality judgment task. In production task, I had different form of the production task. The first one is elicited production completion, that we all use it in our the classroom and in the textbook. So 15 sentences with the blank in which space was to fill either with differential object marker raw or leave it blank. So I already gave you 2 sample sentences. Because this is the first test that I am doing with my students at the beginning, that they learn direct object, differential object marker. So I give them the option of the word. They have to make a decision, add raw or not. So my question was that, does Persian L2 and heritage learners show the omission or overgeneralizing of differential object marker as it attested in the other languages with differential object marker? Heritage learners 100% use differential object marker correctly. And it's not surprising, because they joined the class, they didn't take introductory with me because they are not allowed to take introductory level in University of Toronto. They join us in intermediate and advanced level. But what about L2 learners? L2 learners, 33%, they omit differential object marker, and 30% overgeneralized it. It means that they added the differential object marker raw in the context that they shouldn't, for non-specific, for example, direct object. The second task, which is the combination of production and comprehension, is translation. 10 English sentences contains transitive and intransitive verbs, with or without it. The students should translate from English to Persian. I didn't work on Persian to English. If I wanted to do that, I have to do it in advanced level. So I had the samples of the sentence. 2 questions here is important. Again, what kind of the error they have? Do they omit or overgeneralized? Because usually when we start, translation from the beginning, when the students learn the simple sentence pattern, but we developed that when the students learn relative clause, they know a lot about the sentence structure. So the second question is that in the case of the translation of the relative clauses, which form they use? Do they add the differential object marker after the at the end of the NP, doesn't matter how long is that NP, or just put it in the NP before relative clause? The translation result for the first part, because the students were in intermediate low and then intermediate high, show more improvement in intermediate high 5 to 20% error the students had with using in translation of a differential object marker, although English does not have, and all the source language in translation was English. They have to translate into Persian as target language. They had low mistakes. And what is interesting is that they didn't overgeneralize at all. The mistake focused mainly on omission. They omit the differential object marker. But the second question was very interesting. Where do they put differential object marker when they have relative clause in translation? 66% of heritage learner with high level of proficiency, they add raw as the theoretical linguistic proposal proposed. Just 34% of heritage learners follow the something that we have in the textbook, and we teach through that, and we frequently native speakers use it. But the response of low literacy skill of heritage learner and L2 learner are very close. And 80% follow the instructed pattern that raw card come before the relative clause. Just 20% of them follow what the theoretical linguistic proposal predict. I think that we all have these kinds of production task in our classroom. When the students know the sentence, we scrambled, we disorder the words, and we ask them to make them order. So I test relative clause with a differential object marker in this production task too. What is interesting is that 28% of heritage learners follow the prediction of a theoretical linguistic form. They added differential object marker at the end of the non-phrase. L2 learner, just 20%. 80% follow the structure that we have in the textbook. Oh, sorry. Okay. The last production task, I asked the students directly involved in making relative clauses. This is a 100% production task of relative clause. I gave them 2 sentences with a differential object marker. I asked them to make a relative clause. And you see the a couple of samples sentences that they have, the response of the students. 37% of heritage learners added differential object marker as we expected in theoretical linguistic proposal. 60% follow what we had in the textbook and what we discussed in the class. L2 learner fully follow the book instruction, and it added raw before relative clause. The last task I usually add in my, and I think that in second language pedagogy and acquisition, we all do that, is grammaticality judgment, and grammaticality acceptability judgment. The reason that I added acceptability, because I have heritage learner in the class, and I want to see their reaction to the differential object marker in the context of relative clause. I asked them to rank the similar sentences that you see. زیرزمینی را که پر از آشغال بود تمیز کردم. زیرزمینی که پر از آشغال بود را تمیز کردم. I asked them to judge from 0 on grammatical and unacceptable to 3 grammatical and acceptable, and we have 1 and 2 either acceptable, not acceptable, or grammatical or ungrammatical. So the result was very, very interesting. Almost 73% of heritage learners in grammaticality and acceptability judgment, they found both pattern are grammatical and acceptable. This is something that when I tested with my native speaker, 90 to 90%, 95%, they found the sentences that differential object marker comes before the relative clause is grammatical and acceptable. So why there is such a distinction and a huge difference? So I summarize the whole results here. As you see, in production tasks, between 60 to 72% heritage learner follow the instructed pattern. L2 learner, 80 to 87%. So what is interesting is that the result of L2 learner are more consistent. Even in translation, they had 80% follow the instructed pattern that raw comes before relative clause and such that. But the huge difference is in grammaticality judgment. So between 20 to almost 43% in grammaticality judgment, heritage learner found the instructed pattern that raw comes before relative clause inside the NP grammatical and acceptable, while 85% in L2 learner and native speaker 95% found it grammatical. So what's going on? So I think that L2 learner discussion is not that much difficult because when the L2 learner use the short sentences with differential object marker, the data shows that they show improvement with the method of the instruction and the activity that they are doing. So usually I'm using input processing instruction, explicit instruction with combination of structured input practices. And what I noticed from novice mid to intermediate high that they learned different contexts of the differential object marker. From 0%, they got close to 90% of production and comprehension of differential object marker. In the context of relative clauses for L2 learner, when we have differential object marker, again, they have more consistent result. They follow the structure that we have in the textbook. Even in grammaticality and acceptability judgment, they were close to native speakers. So this support the proposal of full access, full transfer theory hypothesis that L2 learner can be successful learning different grammatical topic that we want, although they cannot have mastery like native speakers, but they can be close to that. Heritage learner. In the case of differential object marker in the context of relative clauses, interestingly, heritage learner were more accurate in production and translation task, but not grammaticality and acceptability judgment. It's interesting, but it's reasonable because grammaticality and acceptability judgment is the most meta-linguistic task that usually measure for explicit teaching. And we know that a heritage learner, when they go for grammaticality judgment, because their knowledge of language is implicit, they are not as accurate as native speakers and L2 learner that learn the concept explicitly. But also, this shows the size of incomplete acquisition of heritage learner when we compare with native speaker. So it shows that there is a gap over there in their learning process. Another factor may be contributed to the structural complexity of differential object marker, specifically in the relative clause context. Differential object marker in all languages is is an interface a concept, lies in morphology, syntax, and semantics, specifically in Persian. In some languages, syntax and semantics, syntax or discourse. Usually, this interface concept is very difficult for heritage learner to not learn, to grasp the idea and develop it, because their grammar, their lexicon is vulnerable in this interface concepts. Very high frequency of occurrence is needed. More input is needed that language learner get the mastery of the topic. It is attested in the field that usually, for example, many of the grammatical concepts that we have, specifically differential object marker, child learn before 5 years old, and then after 5 years develop it. And because of the frequent input that get it from the environment, school, and so on, the child get mastery of that before 12 years old. This is something that heritage learner, at least in my class, didn't have it, because the majority of them left Iran before 5 years or at the when they were 5 years old. The result of this pilot project also shows that exposure to family language births, even under reduced input condition, does not lead to more native-like linguistic knowledge in heritage speaker as opposed to L2 learner that they learn language at a later age. The result shows that in production tasks, specifically because I didn't have oral task, I didn't test it, in writing, L2 learner were far beyond better than heritage learner. In addition to the internal factors, I believe that the external factor was important for heritage learner. Sociolinguistic accept, like age of acquisition, age of the immigration, and qualitatively a different parental input that the student get it. One example that I want to share with you, one of my heritage learner, the majority of them learn Persian in homeschool from their parents. When I asked him that when did you learn Persian, he mentioned that I learned from my mom. Then in the grammaticality acceptability task, I asked him, would you please share these 2 sentences with your mom and give me the result? And it was very interesting. His mom had this almost the same judgment that the son had it. The result of this pilot study also is in the line with interface vulnerability on the linguistic feature, that those features that are interface is a really challenge for every group of language learner, child acquisition and L2 learner, and also for heritage learner. And this is attested for Spanish, Hindi, and Romanian language too. So I conclude my presentation with these remarks and recommendation. Although L2 learners have a challenge in learning differential object marker at early stages of learning process, but with appropriate instructional method, different task and activity that we can prepare as an instructor, educator in the class, we can give them close, not mastery, close to mastery of differential object marker. Heritage learners' incomplete acquisition, age of the immigration, lack of frequent input from a heritage language negatively impact on their learning of the complex interface grammatical concept like differential object marker. Identifying how L2 learners and the heritage speakers differ in their linguistic competence and their process ability is a critical step toward developing efficient pedagogical strategy in language teaching. And a heritage learner, like L2 learners, benefit from our classroom, form-based teaching, doesn't matter, explicit, implicit, a hybrid form. The extent of achievement on different aspects of morphosyntactic knowledge depends on type of structure and type of task. And when we come to interaction, because I always have a few heritage learner in my classes, the interaction of the heritage learner and L2 learner showed me that both benefit and learn from each other. But again, differences based on the task modality. So that's why usually we all do that. We have a team up, we have group in the class, and we put, for different tasks that we have a heritage learner with L2 learner that they benefit from each other. Different aspects of language, module and interfaces are affected differently by linguistic experience in the two types of learners, heritage speakers and L2 learners. And these understandings can only have been achieved by adopting theories and method from theoretical linguistics, psycholinguistic, sociolinguistic, as well as second language pedagogy. So as you have seen, I started with theoretical linguistic, and I try to show that how heritage learner language is under the effect of somehow this proposal. And the sociolinguistic aspect is very helpful for us when we worked with heritage learner, because we want to see that what kind of the external factor, the society, the environment affects their language. So I believe that if we work together, then we will be more successful in our classroom, and our language learner can benefit our classroom. Doesn't matter if they are L2 or a heritage learner. Thank you for your time, and thank you. And I'm so sorry that was so long, but believe me, I try to make it as short as possible.
Thank you so much, Azita Jan. It was an excellent talk, and you had a very nice view, and you took us on the journey of moving from theoretical background to the applied one. So before I take the questions, I just go over some of the key topics that Azita talked about, and then I will ask you to ask your questions. So she talked about of course, acquisition of Ra. She introduced Ra as a differential object marker. She talked about the specificity and definiteness of the object, of the direct object to require Ra. Then she took us through the historical background and gave us some examples of how Ra was used in Old Persian, Middle Persian, and modern, New Persian and Modern Persian. Then she talked about semantic background, and she talked about the definiteness, specificity, animacy, and topicality. And then she explained the theoretical background, and she talked about minimalism and generative grammar hypothesis in second language acquisition. She talked about I found it very interesting that she talked about the theoretical prediction of differential object marker, and that the fact that later on she told us that it doesn't match perfectly with the real world, what happens in the real world. The example that she gave us, Dokhtari Rake and Dokhtari Ke, and then Ra. She talked about universal grammar accounts of second language acquisition and the interface vulnerability hypothesis. She discussed full access, full transfer hypothesis that later on she told us her data supports. She mentioned that the previous studies on differential object marker were mostly on Romance languages, and of course later on some other languages like Hindi. And this makes her research very interesting, because it is one of the first that is going to talk about the acquisition of Ra, not just the study of Ra itself. So she talked about teaching Ra in classroom, and she said when the students have to have first exposure of Ra in second language as well as in heritage language learners. She said usually in textbook that she has observed they are beginning high level when Ra is introduced. Then she talked about the main errors that happen by both second language learners and heritage learners. And she said that the most important one, the most visible errors happen in relative clauses. And then she introduced her own case study, which is a pilot project on 7 participants. She did 4 tasks with them. The first one was elicited production completion. The second one was translation of 10 English to Persian sentences. The third one was combining 2 sentences, making relative clauses. And the fourth one was grammaticality and acceptability judgment. And she said that for her, what proved to be the most useful, the most effective way was combining input instruction with explicit instruction of raw in her classes. And she said that her data was in line with full access, full hypothesis. And she said that second language learners sometimes outdo the heritage learners. And she said it's important to see the social-linguistic factors, psycholinguistic factors, and other factors that are involved in this acquisition of raw. So I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to ask you to ask your questions first, and then I would ask mine if there's time. So please, yes, Sahar, you can go on.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Azita, for this very interesting talk. I am particularly thinking about the case of relative clauses, which was the main source of discrepancy and interesting data in your results. And I was particularly wondering if you have been able to recruit some adult native speakers of Persian, because that might be the case that the discrepancies that you have found will be independently motivated by some other factors other than the language learning per se. And for me, as a native Persian speaker, in terms of the use of raw in relative clauses, there is absolutely variation for me. I can put it either on the noun itself or at the end of the like the whole DP or NP phrase where the relative clause is. Yeah, and I was thinking that it might be a nice point of reference for you in order to have some other conclusions with respect to the use of raw in the context of relative clauses particularly.
Okay, thank you, Farjan. Yes, actually, I had a discussion 2-3 days ago with Arsalan regarding to this data too. You know, my control group, because it's a pilot project, they were, I wanted to be based on the age to be close to my L2, you know, and heritage learner, because as I mentioned, I wanted to also look at the sociolinguistic aspect too. But I agree with you because when I talked with Arsalan also, when Arsalan told me, Azita, this in this context, perhaps a little bit weird, but if we use in the spoken form, perhaps, you know, is different. I think that, yeah, it's better that I consult with, you know, adult native speakers, and specifically, I increase my control group with those who are living in Iran now. And because the effect of, we do not notice that how much the English language affects our judgment and our usage of the language. I am teaching Persian for 22 years, but still, sometimes when the students ask the question, specifically my heritage learner, although I am linguist, I know what's going on, I hesitate in some of their judgment. Yes, that's a very good point, but definitely, perhaps I ask you, you know, one of my, but the problem of linguists is that it's very, very difficult when I ask them to go for grammaticality judgment. I myself also have problem. Unconsciously, our minds go to our linguistics aspects too. But yes, I agree with you. I have to do this because it's a pilot project. I definitely add more adult, again, close or at the age of my heritage speakers and L2 learner from Iran. in Iran, and I, test them. Perhaps, they have different judgment, and it will be helpful for my analysis. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Second question is by Kurosh.
Yeah, do you hear me okay? Let me just go closer to the
Yes,
microphone.
yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Azita. That was really interesting. I have so many questions, but I'd rather not to take everybody's time. So I'd ask one question.
Sure.
And I'd like to highlight the point related to meta-linguistic factors,
Yes.
particularly sociolinguistic factors that I understand might be challenging for every researcher to capture and find the best way to control for.
Yes.
As a native speaker of Persian, but the Kermanshah variety of Persian, in the particular case of the object, the object marker, I easily omit the object marker, both with variation before and after the production of the noun or the relative class. Of course, as I said, there is variation. So I was wondering whether we can check the native variety of parents, what variety of Persian they speak, what are the morphosyntactic properties of those varieties, and would they be influential in the way that they produce such patterns that, as you yourself mentioned, as Sahar mentioned, as a native speaker, we sometimes hesitate, oh, do I say that or not? And then what if those variables come into play, and we might see how that looks. So I think it's very important that we check the parents' native variety of Persian. Yeah.
Thank you, Kurosh. Yes, I absolutely agree with you, because all my, as I mentioned, my native speakers, I have their background question. They were born and raised in Tehran.
Okay.
And this is really important, because nowadays we had another session that Dr. Dehqan talk about that. Right now in Tehran, we cannot say really Tehranese dialect. We have the mingle of everything. This is a very important point that you mentioned. I didn't check with my heritage or my language learner what's the background, or if they specifically heritage learner, the background of their parents' Persian, which place they were, because I told you the majority of them, except two of them, they learned Persian at home. And from mom, from dad, and then a couple of them went to Iranian school when they were in Toronto or US, and so on. It means that the first exposure of learning language, it was home. And what was the variety of the language of parents, I don't know. Mm-hmm. This is something that I mentioned, external factor.
That's right.
That these are the things that really affects the heritage learner. And when they come to our classes, they have the contradiction with what I'm teaching as a standard and what they heard from, at early stages when they learn Persian. And I believe that this comes of inconsistency, perhaps related, as I mentioned, the input that they got from their parents. I don't know. I have to check with them. And, in the broader experiment, because in Spanish, they have done this, a group of the, second language acquisition scholar, they check different, DOM context with monolingual and different context of different dialects of Spanish. How do they check? I didn't check it, but I didn't know that in Kermanshah you omit DOM. I didn't know that this is something that perhaps it's really things that I have to figure out that what's going on in the parental aspects of the input of my students, because it really affects the heritage learners. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Gözde.
Tuesday.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Great. Well, thank you so much, Azita. This has been fascinating. For me, it was very, very relevant because for the others in the audience, I teach Turkish in the same department as Azita. And in Turkish, we also have a differential object marker. And I also have both L2 learners and heritage speakers of Turkish in my class. So in a very similar comparable situation. And although I haven't tested them directly, my intuition is that if we were to test the Turkish learners, we would see similar results as yours, but something really to keep in mind. And I am also very much interested in this issue of DOM because I'm also interested in sentence processing and in the unmarked non-specific objects which come without the marker at the beginning of the sentence, because we also have pro-drop. So if the subject is dropped, then there's a temporary ambiguity between a nominative subject and a direct object without the marker. So how an intimacy there comes into play, of course, in actual sentence processing. So also for that reason, I'm very much interested. So my question is, and you may have mentioned and I may have missed it, so my apologies. Are the learners, L2 learners, all native speakers of English, or do they come from different language backgrounds?
This is a background question. That's a very good question.
Yeah, and also,
all L2 learners except one of them who comes from Arabic, their first language was
English. Okay, yes.
Was English. But interesting that I have graduate student that mentioned that his native language is Arabic. He was the person that answered our differential object marker elicited completion tags 100%. And although Arabic does not have this situation, at the beginning, I thought that he's coming from the Hindi background. He mentioned, but I also think that another factor which is very important and also important for processing too, how many languages these students before that. Yeah, this is something that I also tested, but I didn't include in the paper because I had my heritage learner, in addition that the majority language for them was English, the heritage language was Persian, they knew French, German, and Arabic, Hindi. And this is very interesting. For those students that they have the other languages knowledge, and at least one of those languages has DOM, is or it's simpler to learn differential.
Yeah, that's, thank you so much.
Yeah, but processing, I didn't look at it because it's not my area, but I, have some thought out. I believe that when the sentence, the non-phrase with relative clause is longer and longer. I had discussion with Professor Kahnamoipur the other day. The students have more inclined to add a differential object marker at the end of the
memory reasons. Perfect. Very interesting. And also, if I may just follow up a little bit on that, and we should definitely talk about this much more later on. I think it would be very interesting to look at Persian-Turkish bilinguals, because I have native speakers of Persian in my Turkish classes, and I know some Turkish speakers also learn Persian. So especially in simple sentences, it would be a facilitation probably if there's transfer between languages, but the relative clauses in Turkish are different. We only have the strictly head final. So this is relative clause, noun, and then the object marker. That's the form. Although we also have the key construction borrowed from Persian, it's used much less frequently. So we could expect to see a difference with the complex forms, but a facilitation with the simple forms. And also we have heritage speakers who are bilinguals of Turkish and Persian living in Turkey and in Iran. So we should definitely talk about this.
Yeah, definitely.
More.
I love to. I love to
Yeah.
talk to you and perhaps
Yeah.
go for joint
Yeah,
paper
yeah.
for that. I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
it. I
yeah.
love it. Thank you,
Yeah, so
Kirsten.
thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next person is Abul Fazl.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Taleghani, for illuminating talk, especially for me who doesn't have any background in linguistics. My question is, what are these rules for Ra specifically could be also applied to classical Persian? I know you're a fan of classical Persian literature, and as you know, Ra is used somewhat differently in classical Persian, especially the prose. I mean, with poetry, there are a lot of stylistic differences, but in prose, it used quite differently. And when I was teaching Persian literature, I had a hard time explaining why Ra is here or why it's used in this way. And I wanted to know what are different set of rules apply to classical Persian poetry when it comes to Ra versus standard modern Persian literature or linguistics in general.
Well, thank you, Abul Fazl. You know, in the paper that I mentioned in my presentation, that my focus of theoretical linguistics was on that paper by Karimi and Smith. They had a section about classic literature and how actually they gave some evidence that support their claim about the position of the Ra. So I think that other linguists also work on that in classical literature, you know. But the recent one is Karimi and Smith, and they give some evidence from classic prose, classic literature prose, to support that the position of Ra is as they propose, you know, is in the place that, you know, should be specific. They cannot stay in this, you know, predicate phrase and so on. I can share that part of the paper with you and say that, but you know, I am teaching modern poetry right now, and from linguistic aspect, it's very interesting. I see that, as you mentioned, poetry, we always broke the grammatical rule because of the stylistic reason. But still, in modern Persian poetry, not necessarily, specifically in the Sohrab Sepehri's or some of you know, Shamlu's poetry, we see that, and when I look at this with the structure of differential object marker, honestly, as a linguist, I cannot have any kinds of discussion how I can justify this, that. But I again say that because of a statistic reason. But for prose, no. Prose definitely is very similar to what we have in the modern, and as Karimi and Smith in their proposal mentioned, Ra in classical prose Persian works as they attested in their theoretical linguistics. I can share it with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Arsalan, you're next.
Thank you, Azita. Very interesting talk. I just had one question about one of the data points you shared with us. If I remember correctly, you had like a classification of heritage learners with low literacy and then medium literacy and high literacy.
Yes, yeah.
And interestingly, it looked like the ones with low literacy were more similar to maybe
L2 learner
speakers and L2 learners, possibly also native speakers. And then they go like with medium literacy, that then the trend changes. And then with high literacy, it comes back to something that's close. So I just wanted to have your thoughts on that.
You know, I think that because the heritage learner joined my class when I already covered differential object marker, direct object in the simple sentences. They joined me in intermediate low class and they have implicit knowledge. But I didn't have, because I thought that because specifically in grammaticality judgment, my low literacy skill students, they struggle with grammaticality judgment more than production. As all heritage learner has it. But I think, I have to think about that more. I think that the most difficult one for me to justify that I couldn't right now, those who are medium, they have medium literacy skills. These people, they were highly inconsistent their data. And at the beginning, I thought that it's just one person. I saw that I have 3 of them. No, it wasn't just one of them like this. And I have different tasks for production. I believe that for those who are low, they close to that because they are more, their background shows that they left Iran when they were under the age 5. It means that they didn't get that much input for, as literature mentioned, differential object marker, because it will be the student, usually the language learner, by 5 years old, they know DOM and they develop it. These specifically low enrollment, low literacy skill, they left before 5 years old, and they came to my class, and they were more under the effect of my teaching. And because they mainly follow the structure of what we have in the textbook. Raw comes before relative clause. It was something that, L2 learner having. Medium one, that have some knowledge, they left Iran. A couple of them went to 1st or 2nd year of elementary school. It means that they have, more input when we compare with low literacy. When they come to the class, I think that they have to figure out which one they use it. In production task they do better. In judgment task, because unconscious implicit knowledge is important, usually pop up over there, they struggle. That's why the judgment statistic is very low. And high proficiency level, they were more consistent because look at them, they had more input from the parent, and although they left Iran when they were 5 years old. But the lowest one, all 3 left Iran before 5 years old, and they didn't go to any Persian school, and they learned Persian from their parents, but not in a very, not very frequently. And their parents likes to speak more English than Persian. These are the things.
Thank you. So that's very interesting. Maybe I'll say just quickly something about why I was interested in this. I mean, basically, it was reminiscent of first language acquisition of irregular morphology, as I'm sure you're familiar with. So like for the audience, things like feet, and so at the first stage, typically the child actually produces feet. And then at the second stage, you get foots, which really is an indication of the grammar being acquired. And then at a more advanced stage, you get feet again, which makes me think it would be really interesting to see how Persian-speaking children acquire raw with relative clauses. I don't know if there's any work on this. I haven't seen it, but maybe there's work on this in Iran. and then maybe make comparisons with the heritage and second language speakers and see if there's any pattern that's similar. Thank you very much, as it was very interesting.
No, thank you, Arsalan John. But this is a matter, as I mentioned, challenge. Differential object marker by itself is challenge. And what about, because relative clause is not an easy construction in Persian. So the combination of them, it's very difficult for heritage learner to, keep up with the, acquisition and learning in the class. And I totally agree. I hope that someday we have people that really work on acquisition of the differential object marker, mainly in complex structure like relative clauses and so on, how's going on when the kid, and even for monolingual. Honestly, in Iran, we don't have any research, as long as I know, that focus on how monolingual acquire the relative clauses of differential object marker. I haven't seen any. I tried, but I haven't seen any research about that.
Thank you very much. Ali, you had a question.
Thank you so much, Azita John, for the excellent talk. I have just a quick question. It was unclear to me how far removed were the participants from their exposure to the topic of Ra. Were they uniform in terms of this exposure, in terms of time? Because this may have some bearing on their performance and, as a result, on the conclusions derived from their performance.
Thank you, Ali John. Because time is very important, because the result that I got from my students, it was in different tasks. I didn't mention that. I wish I added to my slide. For a production task, all of them were time-based. They have to finish it in a specific time. But for grammaticality judgment, I didn't give any time because I thought that perhaps affects their judgment under the pressure of the time. But even for production task, they had in the homeworks that they have unlimited time, for example, 3-4 days to do that. And they had some of the, for example, translation, so on. I have in my record that I will reflect it in the paper. They were under the limitation of the quiz time or test. Definitely, I think that it affects. I believe it affects, and also in the literature, it's very important that when we do, because this is just a pilot project, in the experiment that we are doing, first, the subjects should be more. Second, it should be both tasks, written and oral, specifically for heritage speaker. Because we all know that heritage speakers, orals, I believe that when we have oral interaction, specifically in differential object marker, I didn't record it. Heritage learners were better because we know that L2 learner always has the weak point in oral and conversation. Time, definitely. I think that if I want to do it as a big experiment, I have to do some production task, unlimited time or time, and also for judgment. I am sure that for a judgment task, if they have the limited time, perhaps the result was different. Yes.
So I meant more in terms of their exposure to the topic of Ra instructionally.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay. You mean that how long they exposed to the Ra, and then
was it recent, as a recent exposure to them?
Yeah, definitely.
Was it uniform for all of them? Or
for relative clause, it was recent. It was recent for all of them. But for Ra, not for heritage speakers, because as I mentioned, heritage speakers joined me in the intermediate level. But my students learn object raw in short sentences without relative clauses. They already expose it. That's why they had elicited task over there in introductory level. So for heritage learner, they started with me when they were in intermediate low, but for L2 learner, they started 1 year earlier, but not in relative clause. Relative clause data is just for recent. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. There is a fraternity house here, so I don't know if you can hear the music, but I don't think I will ask my question. I will ask you later, Azita. If there is nothing else, no other comments, maybe I will give the floor back to Azita to talk about the continuation of these seminars that is going to come in the fall. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you all. Azita, go on.
Thank you so much, everybody, and specifically my friend, my colleague, Pune, and Professor Taleghani. Without these two people, we didn't have this visual lecture series. And again, thank to Dr. Mir-Djalali for facilitating and supporting us for these kinds of the lecture series. Our next lecture series, this is the last lecture that we had, will be in fall 2023. We have 4 excellent speakers. And in this, if you have noticed in the first lecture series, we focus on more theoretical theme, but we go more on applied theme in fall 2023. And the first talk will be September 9 by Professor Abbasi. And we will be very happy to all colleagues join us in fall. And very soon we distribute the poster of our fall session. And have a wonderful summer. And thank you for your time and for your comment, all audiences, those who ask a question and those who joined us. Thank you. Professor Taleghani.
Thank you, Professor Taleghani, for your interesting, informative, and multi-layered raw expose. And thank you, Professor Pune Shabani Jadidi, for moderating session. And I'm grateful to all of you for joining us. And we look forward to hosting you again next fall. Stay happy and healthy.
Thank you.
Khuda Hafiz.